A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John, the 12th chapter.
Glory to you, Lord.
Now among those who went up to worship at the festival were some Greeks. They came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee, and said to him, "Sir, we wish to see Jesus." Philip went and told Andrew. Then Andrew and Philip went and told Jesus. Jesus answered them, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Very truly I tell you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains just a single grain. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. Those who love their life lose it, and those who hate their life in this world will keep it for eternal life. Whoever serves me must follow me, and where I am, there will my servant be also. Whoever serves me, the Father will honor. Now my soul is troubled, and what should I say? Father, save me from this hour? No, it is for this reason that I have come to this hour. Father, glorify your name." Then a voice came from heaven, "I have glorified it, and I will glorify it again." The crowd standing there heard it and said that it was thunder. Others said, "An angel has spoken to him." Jesus answered, "This voice has come for your sake, not mine. Now is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world will be driven out. And I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself." He said this to indicate the kind of death he was to die. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
In the name of God, holy and mighty, holy and immortal, holy and merciful. Amen. In the town of Oban on the west coast of Scotland, there is a very peculiar landmark. Perched above the town on a high hill is a huge circular structure constructed of the finest granite, with elegant arcades of high arches running all around the building. For all of its grandeur, it looks so out of place in that rather grimy town that people invariably ask how it got there. What they are told is that more than 100 years ago, a wealthy man in that town decided to construct an impressive building that would provide work for unemployed stonemasons and, not incidentally, be a monument to himself. Apparently the economy improved and those stonemasons found work elsewhere because when years later when the man died, the project was far from complete. There were provisions in his will for the completion of the building, but the man's family had other ideas. And after 15 years in the courts, the will was overturned and the building was left just as it was. Well, you and I may not be building elegant arches, but we're all building something. And in a sense, that is what Jesus was speaking about in the gospel we have just heard. Jesus was also building something. And what he was doing would change the course of history. And it would have a price. It is a strange little incident that John writes about in his gospel. Some Greeks wanted to see Jesus. They ask Philip. Philip tells Andrew. And Andrew and Philip go to Jesus and tell him, "There are some Greeks looking for you." And that's all we hear about the Greeks, because Jesus starts talking about a grain of wheat and losing one's life and the responsibility of his followers and his own coming suffering. And in the midst of this solemn discourse, a voice from heaven is heard, a theophany we call it, a voice of affirmation from the heart of God. And Jesus says, "And I, when I am lifted up, will draw all people to myself." Jesus was speaking about what was to come, and it was going to involve every one of us. Because you see, Jesus was building a bridge between earth and heaven, and the cost was to be his life. Now, to many of us, this may sound like so much theological musing over issues far beyond where we live our lives. But for people of faith, this kind of talk is as basic and real as a peanut butter sandwich. You see, over and over, Jesus was telling us that God who dwells in the highest heaven also lives on our streets and visits our homes. And that is not always what we want to hear. After all, many of us aren't really very eager to have God living on our streets and visiting our houses, especially if what we think God does is to make us feel guilty and tell us what we are not to do. And that means a large part of the task of building a bridge between earth and heaven has to begin by a change in our understanding. A part of what must be built is a new way to understand God. Of course, it would help if we can realize that God comes to us in love, that God comes to affirm our lives and not only to judge. Too often, we tend to think of God only as a lawgiver who hands down long lists of commandments and who expects nothing more than obedience. But that view misses most of what the Bible has to say. It misses goodness and mercy and love. And it will help also if we realize that God is not defined or explained simply by who we say God is. To think that we understand it all is to limit God enormously and is very arrogant besides. It's like looking at 1 square inch of a huge painting and concluding that now we have seen it all. God is always more than the words we use or the picture we paint. If that wasn't the case, God would be nothing more than an enlarged version of our own opinions. Of course, the bridge Jesus was building did involve explaining some things about us that we probably don't want to hear. That our pride, which asserts that we are good, and our arrogance, which insists we know it all, are simply foolish and untrue. Jesus taught that God sees behind the brave front we construct and sees through the pious words we say. No matter how hard we try to be more than we are, no matter how much we pretend we understand more than can be known, God looks at us with goodness and mercy and love. Jesus' work was to demonstrate in his own life that this is true, and to show us that it is possible to live without arrogance or pride, to welcome God without fear, and to carry out God's will at all times and in every place. Jesus' work was to reconstruct our understanding of who God is and to build a bridge between earth and heaven. And it was costly. People wanted God to stay in the highest heaven. And people wanted not to be reminded about feeding the poor and healing the sick and liberating the oppressed. And so while Jesus was building a bridge, we were building a cross. And with that cross, we tried to destroy the bridge Jesus built. We did not succeed, of course. That is the meaning of Easter. What we did was to show even more clearly our true colors and make it even more apparent why that bridge was needed at all. But we are building other things too. Each of us is building a life. The basic materials are surprisingly similar, but the outcomes can be very different indeed. Some of us will build carefully, taking time to plan and to consider, enlisting the help of others and avoiding those things that would jeopardize or destroy the task. Some of us will build hastily, failing to count the cost and allowing their efforts to be sabotaged by carelessness or greed. Still, all of us are building a life that will either follow the ways of the world or follow the ways of God. Whoever follows me, Jesus said, will be where I am and will be my servant. To follow Jesus is a costly undertaking, and to do it right will have impact on all that we are and all that we have. As we just heard, Jesus said that the process is like planting a seed. Unless the seed is planted, it will be all potential and no result. Only if the seed pays a price, only if it gives itself up, will it become grain and fruit, shade tree and harvest. And that is also true for us. In everything that we build, a life, a family, even a monument to ourselves, we must be willing to pay the price. Jesus built a bridge, and the price was his life. Now, of course, it's likely that our lives are not going to be taken from us, but there is a cost nonetheless. What Jesus said to his disciples when some Greeks came to see him was that if we want to live, really live, we have to turn away from the things of the world. It is the price of being a follower of his, but there is also great reward. For the worldly things we build have a way of turning to dust. And to pursue only those things is to end up with ashes in our hands. The thing that brings fullness to life are built from within and result in relationships with God and with one another. That's the real issue, I think. Jesus gave his life to restore a relationship, to build a bridge between earth and heaven that would show us what God is like and help us to understand that what we cannot earn, God is already willing to give. It is a gift called grace. It is filled with goodness and mercy and love. It is ours for the asking. But when we ask, we really should be ready to make some changes and put aside for a time all those things in life that we think are so important, those things we just have to do. Because God would like to have a real impact on our lives, to show us the stars, to explain about mercy, to shake up our priorities, and then to send us out to work for justice, to comfort the troubled, to heal the hurting, to soften the hearts of the cruel. To spend our lives this way is to be in God's presence forever. And even that cross we built could not prevent it.